Welcome back to the Tough Questions for God weekly message. Tough Questions for God is all about developing faith without all of the buildings and judgment and pews and things that we're used to. So check it out at toughquestionsforgod.org.
Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Poor in spirit. What's that all about? What does that mean? Isn't that kind of like to be poor in spirit? Isn't that kind of like being a loser? Isn't that what the world would say? Poor in spirit? What do you mean poor in spirit? I'm who I am. I'm a person that can do and accomplish all kinds of things. I remember growing up hearing some expressions from family and friends like, well, nobody likes a party pooper, get with it. Everybody else is. I remember hearing things like, and even going to seminars and stuff when I was in high school. I remember one in particular where this speaker that they brought into high school, he was telling everybody, you need to think positive. That's how you will accomplish great things in life. You need to be positive and you need to always think forward and you can do this through grit and determination. And I remember I went to Catholic grade school, and I remember some of the teachings he used to tell us that, you not only think highly of yourself for who God has created you to be, but also value the responsibilities and the talents that God has given to you. Again, it was kind of confusing. And as I learned more and more about who Jesus is, I started to wonder, did I interpret what I had learned so far wrong? Had I made some mistakes in my understanding of it? I remember being somewhat perplexed. What does it mean to think lowly of yourself? To be poor in spirit? I remember when I got serious about my Christian faith, I remember at one point in the journey, I remember just crying out to God saying, I'm not sure I understand this, being poor in spirit, being the poor party pooper, so to speak. I remember thinking once, you want me to adhere to blessed are the losers? And then I started thinking about, what does it mean to be blessed? Does it mean to be happy? So, how's that work? Blessed or happy are the unhappy? Happy are the losers? Friends, the more we walk with Jesus in our walk of Christian faith, regardless of where you're at in your spiritual journey, because everybody in this room is probably at a different place. But the longer you walk with Christ, the more we should become aware of our spiritual depravity. Listen to what I'm saying. The more we grow in our relationship with God, the more we should realize who we are as people, as His creation, standing before the Almighty Creator. We should see that even more and more and more clearly. Now again, don't look at this as something that's hopeless. It's a way that we understand who we are before our Creator. We should become more aware of the sinful nature of humankind, of our fallen state. Too many times the church, which has done a great job, but also a terrible job over the decades, the more we simply focus on the things that God is offering to us, the gifts that God is going to give us, the beautiful existence and experiences that we have awaiting for us in the kingdom of heaven, and all these wonderful things, the more we look at it as a consumer, I think in many ways, the further we get away from who God is and who we are before Him. I started thinking about some of the greats of the Christian faith that maybe would come to mind, like who'd be a good one? Mother Teresa. You guys remember Mother Teresa, right? Yeah. I'd look at her and I'd say, what a woman of faith. All that she did, all that she gave up. Billy Graham, another one. Well, I started also thinking a little bit about a man by the name of Thomas Kempis. Anybody ever heard of Thomas Kempis? Can't even pronounce it today. All right, Joe, get a hold of yourself. Thomas Kempis. Back in the 1300s, he was a theologian, he was a pastor, and he wrote a book that's called The Imitation of Christ. It's a very deep study of who he was, or who he says he was, or feels like he was back then, before a holy and a perfect God. And this is what he wrote. He wrote in his book, he said, a good man, or he meant a holy man here, or a man who's following Christ to the best of his ability, always finds enough over which to mourn and weep. And as his journey of faith went on, he said, the closer he examines himself, the more he grieves. What was he saying? He was saying that the more that I pray over and I think about and I spend time with God, the more I realize who I am before him, and the more I see my deep and spiritual need for him. He started to see who he was. In the Christian church today, I think in many ways that's one of the things that we've kind of lost sight of. The Christian, and I'm talking about the Christian church worldwide. Too many times we spend time thinking about all of the things that we have coming to us as opposed to who we are before God, which would lead us to understand how much we need him. Ask yourself that question right now. Do you really need God in your life? Now, of course, the Christian answer would be, of course I do. But I mean in your heart of hearts. I mean deep down inside, do you really feel like I need him? And without God, then there's nothing to look forward to here. Do you really feel that way? Each person here has to answer that question. Back at my last charge, we did a thing called Bibles and Beer, and I think I mentioned that to you before. Actually had a couple people leave over it, but that's okay. But we went to the Green Spot Bar in Mount Pleasant for years, and our group would gather on Tuesday nights, and it was really interesting because a lot of the people in the bar they knew we were coming. They would kind of gather themselves around so they could hear what was happening. And I had a guy speak up one night, and he says, he says, I hear what you guys are saying about God and Christ and the sacrifice and all of those things. And this, I knew this guy. He was a nice guy, very benevolent. He gave generously to different organizations and things. And he was a business owner. He was very successful and all these things. And he said to me, he says, you know what? He says, I really don't see anything I need to be forgiven for. And I thought to myself, whoa. And sometimes we feel that way. We feel like, well, I'm a good person. I got all, I'm not a bank robber. I'm going straight to heaven, right? And all those wonderful, beautiful things that God tells us in his word that I've never really read, but I hear about, all of those things are promised to me and it's going to be good. And we spent the rest of that evening talking about how we all need to be saved. We all need to understand who we are before God. Well, Thomas Kempis wrote these words about being poor in spirit, and the more he starts to understand who he is himself, the more he realizes his desperate need for God. King David wrote some of the Psalms we know of. And in Psalm 19:12, and I'll let you go home and look it up for yourself, he writes some words talking about, God, will you show me who I am? God, I can't seem to discover this on my own. Would you open my eyes, my spiritual heart and eyes, to who I am before you? You see, King David realized when he was writing the Psalms that he was a man of great faults. And he could be all puffed up and proud of himself and, I'm this and that and I'm king and all that wonderful stuff. But instead, he chose to humbly look at his own life and say, who am I before this holy and perfect God? Many times in the world and in life, in the church sometimes, there's this thing called self-righteousness. Jesus dealt with it a lot, where people thought that they had it all together. They thought they had all the understanding. They knew exactly what God wanted, and they were going to be God's spoke people to the world, and they got much of it wrong, unfortunately, because they were so deeply involved with self-assessing themselves. They became so self-righteous that they missed the point. Unfortunately, today, a lot of the churches are closing. The Christian church in the United States is a dying organization. I don't know if you know that or not, but it is. The situation we see not only here at this church is all the church. It's everywhere. Attendance is declining. Spirituality is falling apart. There's all kinds of issues there. And I think part of the thing is because people don't really look at themselves outside of being impressed with themselves sometimes. I'm this, I'm that. I have these opportunities. Look at what I have accomplished. Look what I'm getting ready to do. These are my plans. This is where I'm going to be 20 years from now. All these types of things tell us that we are in control. We are good people. We have every right to expect nothing but the best from God when the time comes. Again, we self-assess ourselves. That's a dangerous place to be. When you assess yourself, you lose sight of the faults. You lose sight of really the improvements, the things that could go better, things that you could do much better than what you're used to doing, experiences and all of those things. The more we walk with Christ, the more we become aware of our shortfalls. Now, I would like to be able to tell you that, when you become, a child of God and you start walking with Jesus and your life is a beautiful rose garden, man. I mean, it's just picture perfect, kind of like, remember Willy Wonka? And they went in there and it was Candyland everywhere. Yeah. The reality is the Candyland doesn't come till the next life. This life is going to be difficult, period. Jesus told us that, period. Is it worth it? Yes. Guys, ever hear of a guy by the name of Martin Luther? A couple of you? Back in the 1400s, he was a German professor of theology. He was a priest, a monk. He's the one that started the Protestant Reformation, from where the United Methodist Church sprang. And what happened was Martin Luther, the Catholic Church back then had all of these things that it said you need to do and you need to believe and this does this. And Martin Luther looked at it and said, I don't think all that's biblical. I don't think that they got a leg to stand on, guys. And he wrote this thesis of, I think it was 99 things, and he nailed it on the door of the church. And that's how the Protestant Reformation started. And one of the things that Martin Luther objected to was this aspect of indulgences. You heard about those? An indulgence is where, okay, if I make a donation to the church, then in response to that donation, the church will give me absolution from the sin of my life. Whoa. Back then, they were even doing things like, everybody here likes to sit in the same seats. I get that, okay? And you could buy your seat back then. Yeah. I own this seat. What are you doing in my seat on Sunday morning? Get out of here. But those types of things, those indulgences and the aspect of utilizing money in order to be forgiven of your sins was something that Martin Luther violently objected to, and rightfully so. Now, Martin Luther was a great man of faith. And you know how he referred to himself? He referred to himself as a stinking sinner. He grieved constantly over his understanding of who he was before this holy and perfect God. He was growing in his relationship with God. He was growing in his understanding of who he was, his need for God. On Martin Luther's last day, the day that he died, it's written that they believed that he was actually possessed by a demon. And the reason was because he was mourning so intently over his position before God, his desperate need for God. Now, that doesn't sound like the greatest thing to go through, but the point of it is that he started this journey to understand who he was as God's child so that he could grow deeper in love with God, grow into a deeper understanding of who God is, go into a deeper understanding of what God's plan was of salvation for him and his family and his churches and all those things. And the further he got into it, the more God opened his spiritual mind and heart, the deeper he saw this chasm between the two. And he's like, I desperately need God in my life. And Jesus says what? Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are the losers. Blessed are those that the world hates. Blessed are those that honestly see themselves for who they are. That's a tough place to be. When you're that realistic with yourself. When all of a sudden you realize that without God in my life, without honoring God with my heart, without opening myself to complete faith, trust, hope in who God is and what he has done for me and what he continues to do for me, then I have nothing. You see, that's what this is all about. This is about understanding who you are before God. This is about understanding that God's spared no expense to pave the way, to open the gates so that you could enter, but you have to do it under his terms. And one of the ways that so many people believe that one day if I just live a good life here, then I'm going to see the pearly gates. That's not it at all. Don't get lost in that one. In order to grow in a relationship with God, you have to understand who you are so that we understand our need for him. Really. Are you doing that? Do you invest in your eternal life today? I saw a sign the other day and it said, I think it was Snoopy and Peanuts or something, and Linus said to him or whatever, I can't remember the exact thing, something about dying, and Linus said, well, you only die once, but you live forever. So true. And that's what this is all about, is understanding our desperate need for who God is, for God's provision for us through his son Jesus, and in totally accepting this. Either Jesus was or is God, or he's the greatest liar that the world has ever seen. One or the other. Because he said, I am the truth, the way, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Yes, Gracie? It's what? Good for you. She's got that one memorized. So one night Jesus took bread and he sat down with his disciples. And he broke the bread and he said, this is my body, which will be broken for you. He says, I'm doing this for the remission of your sin because you can't fix it on your own. You can't do it. You're not good enough. I don't care what you've accomplished in your life. I don't care how highly you see yourself or how much self-assessment that you've done that has told you that I'm good. He says, you got to understand something. You can't fix it on your own. You can't. And I'm coming here to do it for you. But you got to believe me. Then he took the cup and he said, this is a cup of my blood, blood of a new and an everlasting covenant. Remember those words, new and everlasting covenant. And he said, my blood will be spilled for you. For the remission of your sin. Again, because you can't do it on your own. You cannot. No matter how hard you try, no matter how good you think you are, you can't do it on your own. Do you believe that? And I'm being very serious, friends. Do you really believe that? Because like that guy in the bar that night, he's like, I don't see anything I really need to be forgiven of. Oh man, we got to talk. Do you see that in your heart of hearts? That yes, I think for the most part, we're good people. We're trying to do the right things. We're trying to be, all these wonderful things, but we always seem to fall short, especially when we're comparing ourselves to God. We fall so short. And that's part of what, Thomas Kempis and all these others were getting at, was they, in their journeys of faith, they came to a deeper, deeper, deeper understanding of who they are before this perfect, holy, omnipotent God. Friends, I'm going to invite you to come forward for a communion and then go back and sit down and have a little conversation with God. And ask God this question. Lord, where am I at on my walk with you right now? Are there some obstacles that maybe I need to get rid of? Are there some things that maybe I need to continue to do? Am I on the right track? Lord, what is it that I can do to grow deeper in my faith, deeper in my understanding of who you are as well as who I am, and how can I serve you better? Ask those questions. So I invite you to come forward.
I'd like to say thanks for checking out my latest post. If you'd like to see more like that, go to the website listed here, and there you're going to find all kinds of different resources available. Thanks, and God bless.